Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is a woman chess grandmaster Atousa, and today I'm going to show you a very nice and instructive game by the legendary Viktor Korchnoi. A lot of you guys probably are familiar with his name. He died, I think, a couple of years ago in 2016. But before that, he was very, very strong. He was even beating the grandmasters in his 70s, 80s. So he was among the top players, even when he was around 80 years old. So he was playing for Russia, Soviet Union back then, and then he moved to Switzerland. So I remember when I played in Chess Olympiad a couple of times, I saw him in the Olympiad, and he was representing Switzerland team in the Chess Olympiad. And he was a really nice guy, so I had this privilege to talk to him. But anyway, I want to talk about this game, so let's dive into the game and see how Viktor Korchnoi could beat his opponent in just 13 moves. Okay, this game is in Queen's Gambit accepted. Actually, I think a lot of you guys know about Queen's Gambit thanks to the famous Queen's Gambit series on Netflix. And as you may know, Queen's Gambit happens after d4, d5, and c4. So this is Queen's Gambit. Gambit is when you usually sacrifice a pawn in the opening in order to get another type of advantage like center or development. So here after c4, so for example, let's say if black takes the pawn, white can play e4 or white can play e3, and white can take his pawn back on c4. But after c4, black can also ignore the gambit and decline the gambit by playing e6 or even c6. So e6 is Queen's Gambit declined, and c6 is Slav defense. Both of these openings are completely playable, even in top level. But today I'm going to show you the game, which was d takes c4. So his opponent accepted the gambit. So Mistrovich is playing as black, as you can see, and he took the pawn. Korchnoi played e4. Now he is controlling the center, and his opponent played e5. Actually, I want to mention that in this position nowadays, white usually moves the knight to f3 to prevent e5, but e4 is also playable. And after e4, black can play e5. e5 is an interesting move. The idea is if white takes the pawn on e5, black can exchange the queens, and after king takes d1, black can play knight c6, and black is attacking this pawn. And let's say after bishop f4, black can develop the bishop, and now black wants to castle long with a check, so black gets a tempo, black gets time here. And for example, let's say here long castle, white blocks the rook with knight bd2, and black can play bishop c5. And you can see that black can get his pieces out with tempos. It means that, for example, black castled, black is checking the king, black moved the bishop to c5, black is attacking the pawn. So it's really hard for white to defend the position. So this specific position is actually favors black. So that's why after pushing the pawn to e5 in the opening, white should not take the pawn. And that's why Viktor Korchnoi played knight f3 in this position. So knight f3 was played, his opponent took the pawn, and Viktor Korchnoi took the pawn on c4. So black is up a pawn in this position, but the pawn on d4 is not that great, and also white is ahead in development, right? So here black checked on b4, which is a logical move. Why? Because whenever you're behind development, you want to get your pieces out with tempo, with time. It means bishop b4 check. So white needs to defend the check. White can't do anything else. So in this position, white blocked with the knight. Black developed the knight to c6. And white castled, which is a logical move. Castle is usually a good idea in the opening because you want to put your king in safety, and also you want to get your rook into the game. So after castling here, black played knight h6. Notice that the knight has to move to h6, because let's say if black wants to move the knight towards the center, which we know that this is the case usually. I mean, you don't want to move your knight towards the edge of the board, and there is a saying that, okay, knight under rim is grim, or knight under rim is dim, right? But not in this position, because if we play knight f6 is not a good move, because white can play e5, and now the knight is under attack. So let's say the knight moves to d5, then white can play knight b3. We are attacking here. Let's say black castles. Then we can take here. Knight takes, queen takes. Now we are attacking this knight. And then let's say bishop e6. Okay, in this position, we need to play bishop g5. If you play bishop takes d5 here with the idea to take the bishop on b4, this is actually not a good move. Why? Because black has a very, very nice move here, c5. What's the point? The point is that the queen is under attack, and once the queen moves, then bishop can take on d5, or probably we can even take with the queen. So black is totally fine in this position. But if black takes immediately, white can win material. So that's why instead of taking the knight, we need to move our bishop to g5. We are attacking the queen, and if the queen moves, now we can take the knight. And what's the point? The point is, if black pushes the pawn to c5, now we can take the bishop with tempo. So now we are attacking the queen. It means if he takes our queen, we can also take black's queen, and we are up in material. So white is totally winning in this position. So that's why in the game, let's go back. After short castle, black played knight h6. So here Viktor Korchnoi played knight b3, bishop g4. Here, if let's say black castles short, we can take the knight and h6, and you know, the king will be exposed, and black didn't want to castle to get this pawn structure, I mean bad pawn structure, and also an exposed king. That's why he played bishop g4 first, and he pinned the knight. Here white played bishop d5, attacking this knight and also blocking the queen from this pawn on d4. If black castles here, which was the best move in this position, then white can take on d4, knight takes d4, and we can take with the queen. And if the bishop takes on f3, here white doesn't need to take this bishop, because then the king will be exposed, right? So white can take the other bishop, and now white is totally fine, because not only white got his pawn back, but also the bishop is under attack. And let's say if the bishop moves, we can simply take the pawn b7, and we can be up in material. So that's why this position is much better for white. So let's go back. That's why white, after moving the bishop to d5, black needs to play knight e5. So the idea is to put pressure on the pin. But knight e5 also has a drawback. Why? Because now we can take on d4. Okay, so here we have a lot of threats. One of them is to take the knight, another one is to take the bishop, right? So black took here. If black takes the knight with the bishop, this is a bad move. Why? Because we can take the knight with check, and then we can take the bishop on f3, or we can even take the knight on h6. Why? Because if the pawn takes, we can take a free rook, check the king, and this position again is totally winning for white. So black cannot take with the bishop, right? So the knight is under attack. He cannot protect the knight. Why? Because the knight is under attack by two pieces, the knight and the queen, and also the bishop is under attack as well. So for example, let's say if the bishop goes to d6, we can still take the knight on e5, obviously. That's why in the game, black took with the knight. This is a check, so we have to take with the pawn, and then black took with the bishop, and here white has a great move. Okay, so this is a tricky position. I want you guys to pause the video and calculate in this position and try to visualize some variations for yourself, because the point is you have a lot of threats here. You can take on g7, you can take on b4, you can take on h6, but which one is actually the best? And here is a tricky situation, so you need to really calculate well, because with just one move you can either win or lose the game. You know, this is very kind of sensitive position. So after bishop takes f3 here, white took on h6, which is the best move. If white takes the bishop on b4, which I think Viktor Korchnoi's opponent was expecting, this is not a good move, because now black can play queen d7, and suddenly white is in trouble. Look at this threat, queen g4 and checkmate. There is no defense against this move other than blocking with the bishop. For example, if the pawn moves to h3 to control this square, we can simply take the pawn, and next move is queen g2 or queen h1 check. So if the bishop goes to e6, we can obviously take with the queen, or we can take with the pawn, and black is better in this position. So that's why it's very important that here white needs to take the knight on h6. Why? Because same scenario. If the pawn takes, in this position, white can take the rook on h8, and the king is in check. Let's say the king moves to d7. Then we can exchange the queens, rook takes, and then we can take the pawn f7, and here white is +5. It means that white has 5 more points, and white is absolutely winning in this position. Okay, so in the game, after bishop takes h6, black moved the queen to d7. What is his plan? His plan is to play queen g4 and checkmate the king. So how can we avoid this checkmate? We have basically two ways to avoid. We can either take on g7 to control this square, or we have a better move which was played by Viktor Korchnoi in the game, and after queen e5 check, here black just resigned. Okay, let's analyze this position, because sometimes, you know, grandmasters can resign, and it's not that easy to see, okay, what's going on in the game? Why did that person, you know, resign? Okay, let's analyze this one before we wrap this game up. So here, after queen e5 check, black has a couple of options. Black can either move the king, or block with the queen, or block with the bishop. Let's start with the king. If the king goes here, we can take the pawn on g7, check, and let's say king e7. Then we're gonna check again on e5. Why? Because by checking here, the king has to move to the 8th rank, to d8, and then the king is blocking the other rook, so we can take the rook. So for example, let's say king d8, now we can pick up the rook with check. So that's the point, and this is absolutely winning, right? Let's say instead of king f8, black goes king d8. After king d8, Okay, you have a couple of options. You can even play knight d4. Computer suggests this move, which is a little bit crazy, but let's say more logical move is to play queen takes g7. You are attacking the rook, right? And let's say if the rook goes to e8 to save the rook, now we have a beautiful fork on f6. The queen checks on f6, and also we can pick up the bishop on the next move. King goes here, queen takes f3, and this is a winning position. Why? Because rook g8 check is not doing anything. We can just simply play king h1, and white's king is safe because yes, there is an open file here towards the king, but black doesn't have enough pieces to attack the white king. So let's go back in this position after checking here. Let's see what happens if black blocks with the bishop. After bishop e7, you have a couple of options here, but the easiest I would say that you can take on f7, check the king, king takes, and then you're gonna check on g7. If the king goes to e8, you can take the rook with check, and if the king goes to e6, now you can play knight d4 check. Notice that your knight is protected, and if the king goes to d6, now you can take the knight, and let's say if black wants to pin your queen, you can also skewer the king and queen and win the queen. So this way you're gonna simply win the queen, and it doesn't matter if he takes your queen, because at the end it is white that can win the game. Okay, so let's go back and look at the last option for black. Let's say in this position black plays queen e7. Black blocks the queen with his queen. Now we can take the pawn again. We check the king. The queen cannot take the bishop, so the king has to take. We can take the pawn g7 again. The king goes to e8, same scenario, right? And if the king goes to e6, we can play knight d4 check again. The king goes to d7. Now we can take the queen, and doesn't matter the bishop or the king takes, so let's assume that he takes with the bishop, and now we can take the bishop with our knight, and here white is +4 and white is totally winning. So that's why in this position, after queen e5 check, black just resigned and black didn't continue the game because white's position is totally winning, and he was playing against Viktor Korchnoi, who probably knew what he's doing, right? So he just resigned and didn't continue the game. I hope you liked this game, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have any suggestions for my next video, let me know in the comment section, and I try my best to make your favorite video for my next one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.